What's important to you? My mission is to ask as many people as possible this question, because I believe once you know what's important, you can design and build a life of purpose, meaning, and fulfillment. My name is James Dean. I'm a life coach, and I hope this podcast inspires you to uncover what's important to you. You can follow me on Instagram and Facebook at James Dean Coaching, or connect with me on LinkedIn. You can also learn how I can help you understand what's important at jamesdeancoaching.com. Today's guest has a fascination for understanding why people do what they do, and she shines the light on purpose, fulfillment, and curiosity to empower others to forge their own paths. Her chosen mission and responsibility as a podcaster and life purpose coach is to gift a living legacy of inspiration, insight, and knowledge to create long-lasting positive ripple effects. On her global podcast, Focus on Why, she speaks with people from all walks of life, providing uplifting and relatable conversations designed to inspire you to take action. She is currently the president of the Professional Speaking Association Southeast Region for the UK and a residential portfolio landlord. Today, we find out what's important to Amy Rowlinson. Do this. Hi, Amy, thank you so much for joining me today.
It's lovely to be here, James.
I'm really looking forward to this. So the first question, Amy, is what's important to you?
Oh, what a great question. And it's changed so much over the recent years. In fact, it's changed since the beginning of lockdown in 2020, when I had a shift from one business to another as one door closed and my business partner wanted to go in a different direction. I created a podcast, and it wasn't one of those overnight podcasts. Pretty much it was.
Okay.
In terms of, I had an idea as soon as I knew that my old podcast and my old business that door was closing. I knew that I still had to continue in the podcast space. I loved the medium, and this gave me a free opportunity to choose the particular door that I wanted to open, and that was the Focus on Why. I woke up with the idea on the 1st of April 2020, and by the 30th of April I'd launched the show and I'd interviewed over 30 people in that time, and it was about purpose.
Yeah.
So what's important to me is understanding purpose and meaning in life, and I think it's just at the stage that I am in my life that I wanted to pursue that, and it was of such interest to me, and I call it midlife beginnings that I'm going through. I love learning, I love growing, and for me it was like I can take other people on this journey at the same time, and that for me was the most important thing, to understand what it was that I was on this planet to do, and then how I could then help other people to understand why they were on the planet too.
Okay, so that is quite a dramatic shift, I suppose, to do to go from an idea to 30 episodes recorded within the space of a month. So tell me a little bit about then the shift from initially, because I know you were doing podcasting before, but it was a very different field in the sense of your previous business and podcast to what you're doing now.
Yeah, as with all things, when you are learning something, the best way to take on board those learnings is to teach them. And so what I was doing is I was learning about property investing, and I had been a property investor for many years. And it was then a natural transition, because people were coming to me and saying, oh, could you help me with, and can you show me how? And so I started to teach it. And that then formed a business with my business partner at the time. And I was also doing separate one-to-one mentoring. And so I had the podcast. The Property Vault podcast was part of that brand. And I loved it. I love sharing the knowledge, the insights, the stories, the learnings, the failures, all of the above with an audience. And we had people coming from all over the world saying, this is amazing, thank you, because we'd been we had a network event, but it was geographically restricted.
Mm.
And so people could turn up. We had 75 people in the room, but we had hundreds, thousands listening online. So this was fantastic because it meant that we could then share that knowledge freely, and people could take it on board and they could apply it. So that was where I was. And then the shift to where I am now, and into a different space and into the life purpose space, was a natural evolution. It was the ability to, again, explore what was of interest to me and where I wanted to really navigate that and chart that life for myself. Again, as I learned more and I read more and I took on board more learnings and trainings in different areas, I could then help other people navigate their own journey. And every journey is unique. That's what's so really cool about this space.
Yeah, absolutely. And to go from, you say, because the one thing you said there a few times about your sort of joy or interest in learning and things that you're interested in. So when you were in that sort of the property space and doing the podcasting, were you then still learning about the quote unquote personal development space and world? Was that something that was always ongoing, or did you kind of, as you say, evolve into it?
Yeah, I probably started back in when I was still working before I had children. I touched on some personal development. I sort of fell into a few areas, and we had some motivational speakers come into the workplace, and then I had children, and I sort of took myself out of that space and didn't really realize that whilst that was happening, whilst I was raising children at home, that whole personal development space was exploding. So when I next went into the bookshop in 2014, it was an entire section. It wasn't just a shelf. It was an entire area. Smart thinking alongside personal development. And that was exciting for me because I was like, this is brilliant. So the few areas that I knew about, I was just on a huge personal journey. And that's where it's taken me and continues to take me always, because there's so much to learn. And one of my favorite quotes is a Shakespearean quote, and I'm from Stratford-upon-Avon. I grew up with Shakespeare, and it's a case of the fool doth think he is wise, but the wise man knows himself to be a fool. And this is the sort of the paradox for me, is that no matter how much I learn, I know there is always more. I know that there's always more to take on board. There is always something that I don't know, and I'm very aware of that. That I'm always learning and growing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, absolutely. And I think it's for me as well, when you are in it, when you're learning as well in a space that's something that you're really interested in, it makes the sort of the learning that much more enjoyable as well. That you're not forcing yourself to try and learn about something. It's part of just what you want to do.
Yeah, it is. And it's interesting. I'm reading a book at the moment, which is Jordan Peterson's 12 Rules for Life. And it's an intense read, but it's really interesting. And the space that he describes of chaos and order always being there in every moment. And when you're half balanced in one foot in chaos and one foot in order, essentially the boundary of that is flow. And that's what's really interesting, is that I know that in the area of chaos, which is the unknown, it's an uncharted territory, but it's also possibilities, it's opportunities, there's dangers, there's failings, but there's also, in the order side, there's what's known, what has been charted. So to be in between and to really constantly feel, I can take this on board, this is where my experience is, this is what I can do, but then also move into a space that is uncharted, is exciting. And that's where the growth happens. And to be in that space in between is fantastic. And it's what 𝗤𝗄𝗻 talks about, flow.
Absolutely. So to bring it then to say that the focus on why and that idea for the podcast, you said it just kind of came to you as such. So explain that a bit more to me, the sort of divine inspiration, so
Well, it's one of those moments that you wake up, and I was essentially dreaming it already, or it woke me up and said, "This is your idea for the podcast." Because I'd been wanting to explore that. I knew that it was going to be centered around purpose, but the actual concept and the idea and the name, I just woke up with. I'd love to say that there was another process that came up with it, but it wasn't. It was literally just that. And so I knew that that was what I was meant to do, and that's who I'm meant to be, is to pursue this journey. And that's why it has been effortless in some respects.
Mm.
Obviously, it requires effort to record a podcast, to get other people to come on, to write my own reflections that I write after every 5 episodes. But from the position of, I launched the show on the 30th of April 2020, and we're now at the time of recording at the end of October, and I've released 307 episodes. That is quite prolific. And
Mm.
it wouldn't be that if I didn't love it, and
Yeah,
if I didn't feel it was the right thing for me to be doing.
absolutely. And I find it similar in a sense of like to my own sort of podcasting journey for or history for just this 6 months or so that I've been doing it. The sort of mirror that I can have is just I just had that question in my head. What's important to you? That was literally the only sort of thing that I kind of was thinking, and because again, it just that question just reverberated around my head because I'm constantly asking myself. So with the focus on why, is it something that you also sort of reflect on yourself as well as your guest?
Absolutely, all the time. So it's about contribution. It's about, what is my contribution to the world, and what's important about that. And for me, helping other people to avoid midlife crises, to create midlife beginnings instead, and to understand and resonate with the stories that I'm sharing, with the stories that people are sharing on the podcast. That for me will help people to find clarity. It will help them to create their own ikigai in their life. It's probably the best way to describe it in terms of purpose, and to
Mm,
bring together the events of the past with the desires for the future, and to understand what their meaning, what their contribution, what their service is to the world.
absolutely. Um, So I'm just going to take a slight tangent here because I before I forget it, because one of the things I from our interactions with you and myself and you, because I think it was I joined you, I connected with you through a workshop you did with the Speaking Association, I think it was, because I know you're a member of and you're one of the I want to use the right term instead of
President for the
president.
Southeast.
There
Yeah.
you go, exactly. I was trying to think of it. Well, what is that term? Um, but what and your use of language I really like in a sense because to me, you're really conscious. So even though you said that it was not midlife crisis, it was midlife beginnings. And I remember in that the talk you did before with the Public Speaking Association was feed forward instead of feedback. So before we talk about the Speaking Association, because you said about Shakespeare, so you must have either a conscious or a love of language, because even just the subtleties I find really interesting.
That's a really lovely reflection. Thank you. I studied linguistics at university. And so for me, the scientific study of language, how we choose language, how we use language, how children acquire language, how we learn more than one language, the derivation of language, the variety of everything about language,
Mm,
I have a fascination for, which is, I think, why, yes, the Professional Speaking Association also ticks that box, because we're speaking, we're using language to affect change. And that's where the podcast comes in as well as a
mm,
medium, is we're using language. And I will have said it in the workshop, in the masterclass that I delivered, in terms of, it's not just about filling in the moments, it's all about finding moments that are fulfilling for us. And again, there's the play on words there, but it's an important positioning of words. And what's important to you, it comes back to the values that we
mm.
have. And so I think, yes, language is of great value to me, and I see it as my tool that I'm able to use, and to use effectively, to help people to choose and to live a better life in whatever way that means. And understanding my values has been an important part of that. But yes, it is an interesting reflection. And I am sure that growing up in a town where Shakespeare was born and going to a school where he was, well, supposedly he proposed to Anne Hathaway in our music room. Who knows if that's true or not? But yes, being surrounded by something, you can't help but to have it filter through for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. But I for myself, obviously not from in sense of that level of language, but I think the reason as well it kind of struck me is because for myself that use of language, as you say, can be so powerful, and it's also, and when you already shared one with the quotes there from Shakespeare as well, and to me, it's not just saying something. Sometimes you can say things for just the sake of saying it. But you say the previous one, it's like the impact of that and the sort of the meaning behind the way we say something, to really sort of embody something, I think can be really powerful. So that's why I was at the reflection. I think it's really, I just love the way that you put it. And I remember I said the feed forward and say where my the just the use of words, because that whole thing of feedback is you just like, oh God, I'm getting that again. So it's just a different term of it. And even it was my where my better half works, they refer to it as feedback as a gift, I think is the way that they phrase it. So it's just the sort of different phrases, use of language can put people in a different way of thinking and being. So tell me a bit more then about the speaking part of, and being president of the Public Speaking Association of the Southeast, and how you got involved in speaking.
Well, again, it was I'd love to say it was an engineered decision. It was more of an accident, but a happy accident. I was reading a book called LinkedIn Bound by Sam Rathling, and in it she recommends to go along to your local professional speaking association. And so I did. And so I'd read the book in February 2020. I reached out to Sam and said, "This is fantastic. Thank you." I then went along to my local meeting in the southeast of England. And that was in March 2020. So it was a final meeting before we went into a lockdown, in-person meeting.
Yeah.
And then we moved online. And because we were able to attend meetings online, that meant I could travel around the country and over to Ireland regularly, which was fantastic because I met many other people in the Professional Speaking Association, members who use speaking as part of their business in very different ways. And meeting those different people, understanding what was their driver. Again, a lot of them came on the podcast because they were able to articulate their why and why they were doing what they were doing. But for me, the journey started when I got asked to enter a competition. It's called Speaker Factor. And that Speaker Factor competition is for emerging speakers within the organization. You get 5 minutes and you have complete free reign about what you want to talk about. But the essential reason for doing it is about becoming more bookable as a speaker. That's the core element or the core reason to enter it, is so that you make yourself much more appealing for people to want to invite you to speak to their organization from a business and get paid for it. So with that in mind, yes, there's also, you have to think about your script, you have to think about your stagecraft and your delivery, but the bookability factor counts for 40% of the marks. So I entered that and I got through to the final. I didn't win, but it was the process of doing that and thinking about what I was going to talk about, what I was going to convey and how I was going to deliver that. It took so much longer than you'd think, because it's easier. Well, I think it was Mark Twain who said it's easier to write. I would have written a longer letter. No, I would have written. What's the thing? I've got myself confused now. It's a case of if I'd had more time, it was a case of it takes much longer to write something shorter.
Yeah.
And it's much easier to write something longer. So to really craft something special in 5 minutes was tricky, and loved it. I then got asked to be the vice president for the region. And the natural progression is from vice president is to become the president the following year. So here I am in 2022. I've been the president for this year. And my succession plan is all the way mapped through to 2025. So I stay on the committee again for another year at least as past president, but it's been the most incredible experience. So I fell into it by accident, having reading a book. And now my mission as president is for the Southeast region, but also to encourage across all of the regions and worldwide, because there are speaking associations for any country. And they're all members of the Global Speaking Federation, which is exciting. We had the Global Speaking Summit in Dublin just last month, which was fantastic. Is to encourage people who aren't in the organization or don't realize how speaking can be such an important part of their business to become a member, to see how they could develop those skills, because communication is at the heart of everything we do.
Absolutely. And I think as well, just the highlight of how not just the impactful it can be as a person speaking for their business, but I was just reflecting on this when I was talking to someone else as part of an interview I was doing podcasting, who has brought speaking into his business, a chap called George Anderson. And he's been developing over the last number of years, very much more focusing on it. And I was reflecting to him when I was talking to him that I remember going to one of his first workshops, one of his first speaking events, when it was all about running, which is what he sort of started in. And that was nearly 10 years ago. And I can still remember points from that. I can't remember the whole talk. I can't remember everything, but I can remember key points, and I still reflect on them now and use them. So it's not just I think from the speaking perspective as the individual who's doing the speaking and their business, but the impact it has on the participants and the audience. If it's delivered in a way that's truly engaging, can have a real impact on the people who are attending as well.
Speaking is all about the audience. It's not about you. It's all about what they're going to take away, what they're going to apply, because that's the key, the giving element of speaking is that people are then going to take something that they've learned or they've found relevant and bring it into their world. Just as you've illustrated, something that George's legacy is 10 years on from that one talk. And that is a power of a great speaker, is that they gift that legacy in some way that you then take on board.
Absolutely. I'm interested as a sort of podcaster who's a few 100 episodes behind you. And one of the things that when I sort of started this earlier this year was to do more of an engagement and a conversation with someone. Where does your guest come in relation to the importance of the podcast? Why did you do it as an interview type thing versus just yourself talking?
It goes right back to my Shakespeare quote: is I don't have all the answers. So by sharing the platform and bringing other people into my space, I'm encouraging the knowledge and wisdom from others to be passed along. So I'm learning every day. I don't have the answers. And I know that, it's one of my core values is to continuously learn and grow. So from that perspective, this is a shared platform, and I bring on not only guests who as interview guests, but I also bring on my audience members on and talk about their experiences being in the audience onto the podcast. So they then essentially become my guests. But it is a case of always evolving, always seeking opportunities of growth. And it's curiosity. It's understanding that the different talents and the different strengths that people have combined, again, is connectedness is for me key, because I just want to bring together these different pieces of the jigsaw, and it's a lifelong project. I know that for sure.
Absolutely. Part of it, obviously, with the podcast that you did previously, with the property, and then what you're doing now, is part of an I suppose, if I'm right, overarching thing of you being in your own business, essentially, you being running your own business and self-employment, whatever you want to call it. How have you found running your own business as such, and your sort of life lessons or lessons from doing that along with the podcast? Or are they completely interlinked? But I'm interested from the business perspective side of it.
So as a coach, people need to know that they can trust you. And with a podcast, what happens is people get to listen to what I have to say and what I think about things. But also when I'm interviewing people, I am able to reflect on what they're sharing, and I ask questions. And so they actually get to sort of almost see me, albeit I'm not life purpose coaching on the podcast, but they get to see me and or hear me, more to the point, in action. And so I have a lot of people who come to me and say, I've been listening to you for a while now, or I've listened to one episode, whatever that the situation is. And but they trust my voice is my ability to convey that trust. And by creating safe spaces for my podcast guests, people recognize that I would be a safe space for them to grow and learn and to explore more of the questions that they want to in their own world. So the podcasting folds in really well with the life coaching elements of my business. And it's just been a really lovely way for me to explore and learn. And it didn't start out like I didn't have that intention. I just knew that I needed to get this particular podcast out there and something would happen as a result of it. And this is what's happened.
That's interesting. So it was the podcast before the business as such in some ways.
Yeah, I mean, I was coaching, but I didn't
Yeah,
know how much of a sort of symbiotic relationship it would have
sure.
until it just occurred. And then people started reaching out and saying, I'd love to work with you. And that also happens from the podcast perspective, because I help people and mentor them to produce their podcasts. So again, it's having a craft that it goes back to that one before where you're doing something and then you become a teacher of it because you're doing it well. And having had a podcast or two podcasts now that have done very well, it's a great joy to then be able to gift that to others and help them to learn the skill and the craft of this medium as well.
Absolutely. No, and so that's how we connected, was you were doing a podcast presentation for that speaking association. So and I think do you still think, in the sense of, because you've been doing it now for across these two, do you still think there is a lot of more to come from this whole space in podcasting?
Oh, 100%. It's so in its naissance at the moment. It really catapulted interest and growth at the beginning of lockdown because people were able to use podcasts more and they were able to listen to them. And ironically, it had taken the best part of 15 years to get to 1 million podcasts at the beginning of 2020. And now we're around about the 3 million mark. So that's huge growth in terms of the time frame. And what is so good about the podcast medium is it's just so versatile in terms of how accessible it is. Yes, it's free. It's a place where you have all of your content in one location. So it's not like you're on a social media platform and you might only see 2% of someone's feed. You get to see, if you subscribe to their show, you see 100% of their content. And there's no other way that you can sort of access that in that same way on the social media platforms. So I think it's a great medium in that space. But in terms of it comes back down to the trust element, but also that the personal relationship that you form in a podcast with the audience, ironically, even though they're not there, is incredible. In the same time, you're not getting instant feedback. You're creating a moment that they are then listening, and it is such a personal space, because what's happening is people tend to be already doing an activity. They're walking, they're driving, they're commuting, they're exercising, they may be cooking, but what they're not doing is they're sitting on their device, perhaps scrolling and looking at other things. So you've got a very, very strong relationship that you've got with the people. They're listening to you, and the numbers are phenomenal in terms of how much time people listen to podcasts compared to other platforms. So yes, you have that great relationship, and I often describe it as you are the soundtrack to the movies that people are playing.
That's an interesting, different way of putting it, but I find it, say, just even myself, one of the reasons, I think I've said this before, a sense of starting it was, prior to doing this myself, I was doing just LinkedIn articles and going. I did blogs, I suppose, years ago, and I was writing, and then I was sharing it, and then someone in a Facebook group said, "Oh, well, do you do a podcast instead of reading? Because I don't really want to read, but I'll listen." And I thought that, well, that was quite interesting. And it was also then when I reflected myself was that that's kind of what I would do. I'd be tend to more to listen than I would. I'd read a book, but not necessarily read something on a screen or online in sense of. So I was getting told that that's where the shift was. It's interesting when you take it from the outside. Like, I want to hear more what you got to say, but I literally want to hear it. I don't want to have to read it. So it's listening to the audience, as you say, is there. It's taking almost the lead from them and getting into it. The other thing I was just going to ask you then, in the sense of when you obviously started the focus on why beginning of the first lockdown in 2020, I'm interested in the sense of did the pandemic, from a lot of the people you've spoken to, did that sort of shift a lot of people in the sense of when they come to talk to you about, and the question you ask, which is focus on why, do you see a lot of people reflecting on that sort of period in time?
Absolutely. And what was interesting is some people came on the show and recorded their episode. And in that episode, I could see a shift. And afterwards, they said, I don't think we should be releasing this because I've realized during the recording of this interview that I'm not doing what I want to be doing. There's a reason I don't feel comfortable. And they went away. And this happened, I think, about four or five times. And they came back a few months later, and one person is still yet to come back. They're still in that sort of transition between where they were and where they are now. But those that come back and they've recorded their podcasts, oh my goodness, it's been a huge catalyst for them. So yes, the lockdown timing was fortunate, but I think also it's a combination of where people are in their life and the reevaluation of the circumstances, for sure. And it's about taking that responsibility for the individual. I was working with a client earlier, and it's a reflection from something that Jordan Peterson mentions in his book 12 Rules for Life, is that we take care of our pets more than we take care of ourselves. And sometimes that is a stark reality. And I say it a lot to people. I've written blogs about health. Where will you live tomorrow if you don't take care of your body today? And it's such we take our health for granted, but we also put ourselves sometimes to the back of the queue, and that actually doesn't serve others either. So I can't remember where the question started, but this is the reflection. Oh yes, about the lockdown. Yeah. And the lockdown was all about health. It was all about being able to breathe. Yeah. So it was a focus on health.
Absolutely. No, because I think and even the reflecting back in a sense of earlier in the conversation, and that whole thing of where you're putting it at midlife beginnings versus midlife crisis. And I think a lot of the people that I've spoken to, they've had these either transitions or changes in circumstances, forced or not forced, or choices, maybe revolving around career, or just in life in general. And that as what you're trying to do in a sense of your podcast, but then obviously your work in a sense of even the way you call it life purpose coach, and that sort of enabling people to find that. Because I suppose for my own thing of what I hear of people, and it's interesting you said that people were talking about it and then realized actually I'm not doing any of this. Because that's one of the things that I found when I ask people this question of what's important to you is I think, well, are you saying a lot of things that you think and feel that are important, but you're not doing any of them? Or are you just doing a lot of stuff and just doing and doing and doing without actually any connection to it? Because it's one of those things that, and I'd be interested in your sort of thoughts on this. A few people, when I've asked them this question, they just say, "Oh, I want to be myself." And then it's like, well, what does that actually mean? And that's a kind of real sort of, you go further. So I'll ask you a sense of, what would being yourself mean to you?
It is essentially going back to you are what you do. I think it's an Aristotle quote. I can't remember exactly, but that's in its essence, is that what I'm doing is who I'm being. And I'm not just filling in those moments. I am really looking at work that's fulfilling. But that has been a process of discovery of what it is that I enjoy doing, what is it I the world needs. It comes back to the ikigai concept, which is fantastic. What the world needs, what you can be paid for, what you're good at, and what you absolutely love. And it's understanding who you are. So being myself has been a journey. It has been a joy in essence to understand that. And it really does come down to that switching of autopilot, switching off the autopilot and taking control and living my life with self-awareness and responsibility. And it's something that I'm passionate about. And that's what's important to me, is to help others to understand that there's always going to be pain and suffering. It's how we grow and learn. It's how we really move ourselves forward. There's a story, isn't there, about the butterfly who struggles in the chrysalis. And if you try and help it, you're not actually helping it. It has to learn itself. It has to struggle. That's how its wings get stronger. And so that struggle, almost to the point of death, of trying to get out, is where it learns and it becomes stronger. And that sort of metaphor is not a metaphor, it's a reality, but it is useful to understand that where we are in life and what we've experienced is a learning, and it is a strengthening of our character. And so being myself, being where I am right now, is again just a step in the journey of where I'm going. And I'm very aware of everything I'm doing has a ripple effect. Every action I take has a ripple effect. So in the doing, it's also linked heavily to the being. And I am so excited with my work. I love doing what I do. I love getting words back from people who have listened to an episode and then have shared what they are now doing as a result of it. That is mission accomplished, albeit an ongoing mission, because there's always more that I'm looking for. I don't know if you know about love languages. Yeah. So words of affirmation and an acts of service are my two highest forms of love, and that makes perfect sense. My acts of service is my podcast, and the words I use and the words I receive are the way that fuel and drive me.
Yeah, I love that, and that's what I what I love is when people, it's like anything that can be read or learned, but it's the application, and it's the real sort of like, how does this, when we've talked about about values, and you've mentioned Jordan Peterson's their book. I haven't read the book yet, it's on the list, but I've watched a lot of his content, and it's allowing to think, well, actually, I don't, this is where I think a lot of people can struggle, is thinking, do I have to agree with everything? No, but is there something that that resonates with you, that then you can apply, that makes sense, that then you can then use as some sort of guide or truth or something to move you forward? So the fact that, like you mentioned, that the love language is there, it's a really interesting idea, but it's like, it can, when you really think about them, it can make sense, and make you think, well, actually, I'm not that crazy. This is actually, there's something behind some of these things. So when it comes to sort of my thing of learning, is like, well, how do you actually then use it? So it's a great to hear a demonstration of something like the love languages that you use. It's really interesting.
And I think it was Anton Chekhov who said that knowledge is of no use unless you apply it. And it is absolutely true. That doesn't matter how many books you read or how many courses you go on, or whatever journey you're taking yourself on, unless you then physically take those learnings and apply them, then it's of no value. Which is why I have my reflections episodes after every 5 interviews. I have the reflections with actions. So it's about what I've taken away, what I've then gone on to learn more about, and then how I'm using that in my own world. And that for me is a distillation of the learnings. And it's fantastic in terms of take my key takeaways, but it's also helping other people to see how they can also take on board what the stories are being shared, what the learnings are, and how they are relevant to their own lives, which is why I say it's great. I don't have them out as videos. I just use it as an audio form with a podcast, because it is the soundtrack to the people's movies that they then can, apply, they can rewrite, they can use, but it is a case of just moving forward always.
Absolutely. I didn't even have to ask you specifically. You shared so many quotes with me today, which is fantastic. And lots of people you mentioned. Are there any other sort of people out there, whether it be public eye or private, that you think have had a big influence or importance on you?
I think there's been so many, in terms of a lot of the guests who've come on have had their own impact in some way. In terms of higher profile, there have been some big players there. To name a few, I would say Nelson Mandela, I would say Oprah in her way, and Simon Sinek for the whole Start With Why instigation of that. In terms of writers, oh my goodness, I'm a big book fan, and I think Stephen Covey has really influenced a lot of my thoughts in terms of my understanding of others as well. And I have to give a nod to Shakespeare. In terms of, it's been quite an influential start, and you've definitely highlighted the language influence there. And in terms of a lot of my formative years growing up and going to see Shakespearean plays, essentially they're about human reaction and interaction and relationships that we form and how we respond to that. And that has probably also had a nod into my direction of where I've become a coach. If I'd known that, if I'd seen those dots then, I probably would have gone into coaching a lot sooner. Ironically, I was a coach when I was aged about 13, 14. So I was already doing it. I'm just thinking now, I used to coach people rowing. So I have been a coach pretty much all the way through my life, just in different forms.
Absolutely. And it's that whole thing sometimes you say with hindsight, and I reflect on that myself sometimes, but then I kind of come back and go, well, actually, if I hadn't have done those, we wouldn't have be the coach or person you are now. So it's kind of like, actually, you know what, that was the benefit in some ways. You say, and then when you do think, you go, well, actually, I was just doing it the whole time, but just, as you say, in a different form.
Yeah. And I think one of the books I've read, which is Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning. And in that book, he also quotes Nietzsche, and he whose life has a why can bear almost any how. And that has probably had the biggest influence on the reason why I called it Focus on Why. Because it's not just a case of starting with why, albeit that is important, but it's about having that overriding and all-encompassing constant focus on the why.
Yeah, absolutely. Amy, it's been fantastic to chat to you. I've loved getting to know more about you. It's been interesting, I'm sure, for you to be on the other side of the microphone as well, be answering the questions. I just have one more for you before we finish up, which is, what's important for your future?
For me, it's about the continuing of a living legacy. So I'm all about living the legacy that I want to leave behind and enjoying it right now. So in terms of where I'm moving forward, there's always going to be a focus on my values to ensure they're being honored and that I'm fulfilling them. But in terms of what I want to achieve, again, it's really highlighting just the difference between a life of existence and a life of living. And that for me is all the difference between the focus on your values and using them as a guiding force. So for me, I'm so excited about what the future will bring me, and I'm open to opportunities. Again, let's go back to that chaos and order. I'm actually happy to sort of push out and explore uncharted territory. So who knows?
That's fantastic. As I say, Amy, it's been brilliant to chat to you. I've really enjoyed it. I want to obviously make sure that people continue to support and follow you. So we'll make sure everything, any links are in the notes. But if you want to give a shout out now where people can connect and follow you online.
Yeah, perfect. If you go to amyrowlinson.com to my website, all of the links are there. And also, it's the same name on all of the social media platforms. And the podcast is called Focus on Why.
Fantastic. As I say, everything will be in the notes for everyone as well there. Amy, once again, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to What's Important to You. If you enjoyed this episode, please like, comment, and share. And make sure you subscribe so you don't miss out on any future episodes. Again, you can follow me at James Dean Coaching on Facebook and Instagram. Connect with me on LinkedIn or find out more about me on jamesdeancoaching.com.